If I had a nickel for every time I did a video themed around the Geneva Conventions, I'd have 2 nickels. That's not a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. Hey guys, and welcome back to another Despicable Groove video. Now, I have a feeling you all remember Among Us. The Among Us craze in 2020 was certainly a time to be alive, and just wild. However, this year, it will have been 5 years since the game got so popular. But in 2020, as the game got so massive, an interesting change took place. One day, the Skeld map, the Geneva location, got a minor update. With all being changed is that the medical crosses plastered on the walls got changed to a light blue color when it was originally a classic shade of red. Most players didn't notice, and the ones who did probably didn't think twice about this change. But why I bring it up is that this seemingly innocent change is quite the interesting story behind it. Now you might think that a change like this is pretty pointless, especially considering that it's not like the whole of the medbay got really updated, it's just these crosses in particular. Some people might even think this change might make no sense, as the red medical crosses are always red, even though in my opinion, I think the light blue is a little better and it's more sleeker compared to the OG version. But what if I told you that Interslop, the Among Us devs, didn't intend to do this, but instead, they were essentially forced to make this change, as if he used a red cross with a white background in a piece of media such as a video game like Among Us, he would be violating the Geneva Conventions, which are a set of international humanitarian laws that establish international legal standards for humanitarian treatment in war. So if Interslop would make this change, they would be committing war crimes, and they already technically had committed said war crimes without knowing. And if Interslop wouldn't have made this change, they would have been faced with criminal prosecution, military disciplinary actions, court-martial. The list goes on the amount of possible punishments that could have been inflicted on people who break the Geneva Conventions. I'll discuss this more in depth later, but Interslop probably would have gotten a less severe punishment than prosecution or literally the military being sent to them, or they for sure would have been in a heap of trouble. Now, you might be thinking, why is using a simple red cross with a white background without government permission enough to be sent to court? Well, dear viewer, I probably should tell you more about the cross's background history, which will help you understand why Interslop had to change. The red cross symbol is meant to be a universal symbol of protection and neutrality during war, and was established by the Geneva Conventions. This symbol, being established and what it stands for, is actually the very first Geneva Convention made all the way back in 1864. When a red cross is used with a white background through unauthorized use, it could dilute the symbol's meaning, hinder humanitarian efforts, and this can all lead to its misuse as a war crime. This Geneva Convention is protected by international law, and only certain groups of people can use it, such as the military, the International Committee of the Red Cross, and the American Red Cross Organization. And so in short, international law bans use of the symbol for people outside of legal groups that can use it, as its use can hinder the meaning of the cross, and can be used possibly in a negative way. And since the meaning of the cross is neutralism and protection of human beings in war and humanitarian efforts, yeah, it would not be so great if hindered or used in a bad way. And now circling back to Among Us, this is probably why they were asked to change the cross in some way, because even though its meaning in the context of the game was medically used in health, it doesn't exactly line up with its meaning in real life. And it's not like Interslop asked permission from the government. They didn't even know they were practically committing a war crime in the first place. So that's why when either the government or one of the organizations to use the Red Cross caught one of the Red Cross white background use in Among Us, they formally requested for them to change it. But getting back to the point of Among Us practically not knowing they were violating the Geneva Conventions. So when the government informed Interslop to change the cross to avoid violating the Geneva Conventions, how did they respond? Did Interslop snap back and refuse to change the cross? Did they bargain with the government over it? No, they simply complied with the government's request and completely changed the color of the cross from red to light blue. And now that symbol was no longer a red cross with a white background, but a blue cross with a white background instead. And since it's no longer violated the Geneva Conventions, Among Us was free from this war criminal status. And then nothing too crazy happened between the exchange, but at least Among Us never got into any deep trouble. Interslop didn't know that replicating the Geneva Convention symbol of neutrality and humanitarian efforts could potentially land him in deep trouble. I bet at least some of the creators didn't even know about the symbol's existence and meaning. But this has happened before with other games as well, such as Smash Bros. Melee and Prison Architect, that put a red cross with a white background unknowing about the Geneva Conventions. It's honestly a bit surprising that it took about 2 years for the government to notice this, since remember, Among Us was 2018, not 2020. Then you also remember that the game had a rocky start at launch, with only about 1,000 people playing the game on Steam. And while I haven't checked the numbers for the mobile player count at the time, they couldn't have been that high either. And even though the game got consistent content updates for the next 2 years, along with slowly growing its player base, only a small handful of people played the game. That was until mid-2020 with the pandemic running high and people being quarantined, man. And I'm sure you all know the story of how Among Us blew up in popularity at the time. So it actually makes sense that the government didn't notice this until the game got as popular as it did. Also, another interesting thing about the story is that this was kept behind closed doors, unbeknownst to the public, as only the crew at Intersoft and the government knew about this matter. This situation didn't even reach the public eye until February 1st, 2023, which is well over 2 years after they changed the Medbay Cross. This info came out in an official tweet on Twitter by Among Us themselves, where they stated a fun fact and explained how, after the game got big in 2020, they had to change the Medbay Cross since it being read as illegal, went on the background as they were violating the Geneva Conventions, being followed up with a oops. And according to the website NME and their article about this scenario, the studio even joked about this with the term war criminal crewmates. And honestly, with the context of the situation, them saying oops to essentially committing a war crime is pretty funny, but also makes sense. And that's where the story ends. It may not have been very widespread news, as I've never heard too many people talk about this, but it's definitely a very interesting part of Among Us' history. And that's all for today's video. Even though there's not a ton to the story, I feel like it was intriguing enough to make this video on it, especially considering that people may not know this little factoid about Among Us. Honestly, committing a war crime sounds like something an Among Us imposter would do. But that's all I have to say for this video. With that, make sure to like and subscribe. You don't have to, but it helps the channel a lot. Make sure to follow my Twitter, links in the description, and if you want to see more like this, make sure to check out some of my other vids and content. Well, bye guys, take care, I'll see you all in the next video.